Hello, friends, comrades, and interested others. For my next couple of videos, I'm going to be covering topics of community organizing, specifically what it is, and actually like a little bit of a play-by-play on how to do some things involving organizing in your community. Community organizing is a phrase that activists use quite often. You'll hear people refer to themselves or other people as community organizers, and refer to activist projects as organizing, but there's less conversation about what community organizing actually is and how to do it. So to someone wanting to get involved in activism, it may be difficult to find that kind of entry point into where you can get involved and what skills you need to know to do certain things. Organizing is something that anyone can do, and in many ways, we are already doing it in our daily lives, at work, at school, at home, and in our communities. Every group of people is organized in some way, whether intentionally or not. Governments, corporations, gangs, tribes, food co-ops, sewing circles, friend groups are all examples of human organizing. I want to get into the basics of how to do organizing, but first I want to address the question of why. Why take on the responsibility for how our society is being run? Why do additional work when we're already straining under our jobs and other life obligations? Why not just let someone else make all the important decisions for us? Mainstream politicians and our so-called representatives would have us believe that politics is a top-down procedure guided by the wealthy, governing the lives of average people. The average people themselves have very little input and are discouraged from broader forms of civic engagement, with the exception of going out to the polls to vote for your favorite color every 4 years. But politics is so much more than that. It's something that we're engaged in our everyday lives, when we help each other, when we take a position on a social issue, or when we make decisions that affect other people. I'm an advocate of grassroots or bottom-up politics. Bottom-up means that the political change is guided by working and marginalized people up to the ruling class. This is done by protesting, campaigning, striking, boycotting, making demands on behalf of ourselves and our communities, and by out-organizing other institutions and far-right movements. We cannot wait for our governments to advocate for average people, because it is never in their interest to do so. The government's primary motivation is to accumulate wealth, which requires exploitation to achieve. Therefore, addressing the concerns of working people and vulnerable communities will never be done in good faith. It is only something to be carted out to stir up votes around election time and then quickly put away in order to continue pursuing profit. No, when it comes to taking care of ourselves, our towns, and our communities, the only solution we have is to do it ourselves. The state acts as a placeholder, providing the basic necessities of life to the citizens within its borders. This is often why people wind up defending state structures, because without them, where would we get our food, our medicine? How would our schools be run? Who would collect the garbage? These may all seem like good things that the government provides, and for those in a more privileged socioeconomic position, it may be a genuinely good deal. But for the majority of people, the government's reasons for providing these services is to create a situation where we are dependent on it so that we cannot opt out of labor exploitation. Far from empowering, the government actually restricts and sabotages community attempts to provide sustenance for one another, which is why you often see strict laws on food sharing and the absence of public food gardens, which it would be totally possible to have in pretty much every community. The problem with having these necessary provisions controlled by the state is that when state structures inevitably fail, when it fails to advocate for exploited workers, or when it enacts violence on its own people, we have nowhere to turn to get the necessities of life. We may be forced to bargain and haggle with the government to provide for us, and since we are workers whose labor is being exploited for profit, it is never in the state's interest to enact true justice. With many simultaneous uprisings occurring around the world, there has been much talk of revolution, but there has still been more people bemoaning the hopelessness of convincing society away from participation in the state and towards anarchist or socialist ways of organizing. The crux of this issue is that people will never be convinced away from a system that offers them the means to sustain themselves without being offered an alternative, even if they are suffering and being exploited, and even if they are not living up to a fraction of their potential as human beings. Food is food, and if one system promises food and the other system presents uncertainty, then food will win out every time. But with climate change encroaching, our current food system is dwindling. Our towns and cities generally only have a few days' supply of food when there's a holdup in the chain of delivery, and none of our neighborhoods are growing enough food to sustain us when the supply slows or halts. In the Western world, we are reliant on food that has grown under conditions of hyper-exploitation using unsustainable agricultural practices, And under capitalism, we are unable to move away from that system of exploitation because the government has no interest in providing us the means to independently feed ourselves. This was exemplified during the colonization of Turtle Island. Colonizers exterminated the bison so that indigenous people couldn't feed themselves because making people reliant on the state as their food source was essential to controlling the population. The difference is that for white settlers, we were pre-colonized. Our relationships to the land that would allow us to sustain ourselves most efficiently were taken from us during the original colonizations in Europe thousands of years ago. That doesn't mean that those relationships can't be rebuilt, but it will take a concerted effort to do so, and we need to be willing to follow the leadership of the indigenous people on whose land we are now living. In many ways, the state acts like an abusive parent to the people it is exploiting, and we need to learn to care for ourselves before we will be able to escape this exploitation. In every way we can, we need to start moving away from state and corporate services and towards community autonomy and interdependence. Luckily, because the state has so many glaring failures and shortcomings already, there are usually a variety of avenues to organize around. Picking an issue to organize around and providing services that the state is neglecting is a threefold victory. You provide necessary care for the people in your community, you reduce the harm that is caused by austerity policies, and you achieve the moral victory of displaying the potential of autonomous community organizing. There is much work to be done in building the structures that could save our society from ecological catastrophe and the devastation of late capitalism, and no one is going to save the world by themselves. This is why it is essential for everyone to learn how to organize with others and to adopt a mindset of organizing at all times in all situations. People are naturally so full of innovation, potential, and desire to create and succeed. It is well known that children who grow up to be skilled professionals generally come from wealthy families. However, neither scientific interest nor aptitude are limited by socioeconomic barriers. Imagine for a moment what our society would be like if everyone, regardless of their background, was free to pursue their passion in science, art, or engineering. If no one was scrambling to put food on the table or forced to compromise their integrity to get by, and everyone was able to develop their abilities motivated by social responsibility and passion, imagine what we could achieve. It is known that if our time and effort was focused on productive projects that directly benefited our community, we would actually wind up doing substantially less work than we are currently. And the work would be meaningful, it would be safer, it would be so unlike the drudgery that we've grown accustomed to that it might not even be called work. Think of all the unnecessary jobs that are done under exploitative conditions. Salesmen, cashiers, Walmart greeters, so many people slaving away every day in jobs that isolate them from their communities while not really helping anyone or even making enough money to sustain themselves. We will always need cooks, but wouldn't it be so much better to be cooking for friends, with food you grew together, to have a house to go home to after? It may seem like a daunting task to take into our own hands the responsibilities for providing the services that sustain our communities, but remember that in most ways we're already doing it. CEOs aren't out here bagging groceries or collecting garbage, and most restaurant workers know that the operation runs smoother when the boss isn't there. Working people are already running this shit. We have power and we can make decisions about how we use our time and who we do our work for. But before we can do that, we need to get organized. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you found it informative or helpful. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, if you'd like to have a conversation, the comment section is open. I will include links to the Unistoten Camp website where you can donate because they still need help with their legal fees. And I will also include a link to my own PayPal because I am currently quitting my job due to disability stuff and I need money to keep being able to do things. So I will also be uploading new videos soon. I have a 101 script that I just wrote about some entry-level organizing skills and how to actually do things. So stay tuned for that. And as always, thanks for watching, thanks for coming by, and I will see you soon. Peace out.